My patient's family treated me like dirt at his funeral. They didn't know he'd left me his entire fortune. What was your best, do you know who I am moment? I arrived at Mr. Stewart's funeral wearing my only black dress, my eyes still swollen from crying since he'd passed 3 days ago. I'd been his hospice nurse for 2 years, but we'd become extremely close, fixing each other's crossword puzzles and arguing about best pizza toppings. The Stewart family, who'd visited maybe twice in those 2 years, were already at the funeral in their designer mourning clothes. The eldest son immediately snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog. It was immediately clear they had no idea Mr. Stewart had made me the sole beneficiary of his estate, because I was the only person who really cared about him. Finally, the help is here, Avery announced to his siblings. Set up the refreshment table. The caterers left everything in the kitchen, and apparently we have to do everything ourselves today. When I tried to explain I was there to pay my respects, he cut me off. You were paid to take care of him. That includes taking care of his funeral arrangements. The bathroom needs paper towels too. I started to walk toward Mr. Stewart's casket to say goodbye, but his daughter Claire blocked my path. Family only at the casket right now. You can clean around it later. She looked at my dress with disgust. Is that what you wore to work? No wonder Dad was always talking about you. You probably reminded him of the maids from his childhood. The youngest son, Luke, handed me his coat without looking at me. Hang this up somewhere. And while you're at it, my kid spilled juice in the vestibule. Clean it before someone important sees it. When I didn't move immediately, still trying to process that Mr. Stewart was really gone, Luke snapped, Hello? Do you understand English? Oh wait, you're probably illegal. Should I call ICE to motivate you? Claire's husband joined in, speaking slowly and loudly like I was deaf. You clean now. Comprend? He turned to his wife. How did Dad even communicate with her? Probably just pointed at things. He made exaggerated cleaning motions. Like this, see? Scrub scrub. Even illegals understand sign language. When I tried to sign the guest book, Avery grabbed the pen from my hand. That's for people who actually knew him, not employees. You're not a guest. You're working. He shoved a tray of glasses at me. Pass these around and don't speak to anyone. Nobody wants to hear broken English at a funeral. I was crying quietly while serving drinks when Claire noticed and pulled me aside roughly. Stop making this about you. You're embarrassing us in front of the senator. He doesn't need to see the help crying. She actually slapped me lightly across the face. Get it together or get out. Actually, wait. You can't leave because someone needs to clean up after. Luke's teenage son thought it would be funny to trip me while I was carrying a tray of food. I fell hard, appetizers scattering everywhere, and the whole family laughed. Look, the maid's drunk. Probably stealing Grandpa's wine. Luke added, This is why we don't hire your kind. No coordination, no class. They made me clean it up on my hands and knees while guests watched. Claire found my purse and dumped it out, looking for stolen items. Let's see what she's taking. Dad's medications, probably, to sell on the street. She found the chess piece Mr. Stewart had given me, his favorite knight, and snatched it. Thief! This is a family heirloom. When I tried to explain he'd given it to me the night before he died, she called me a liar and said she'd have me deported. Avery announced to the room, For those wondering, this is the woman who watched Dad die. Probably hastened it along once she realized there was nothing in it for her. These people come here, take our jobs, and take advantage of dying Americans. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. You're done here. After today, you never contact this family again, or I'll have you arrested. They forced me to serve food during the eulogy, not letting me listen to people talk about the man I'd loved like a grandfather. When I started crying again, Claire threw water in my face. I said, Stop crying. You have no right to mourn him. You were hired help, nothing more. He probably didn't even know your name. He'd called me by my nickname every day, told me I was the daughter he wished he'd had. Luke grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me. After this is over, you're gone, and we're reporting you to immigration. I don't care if you're legal or not. We'll make your life hell. You leeched off our father for 2 years, and that ends today. He pushed me toward the kitchen. Go wash dishes where you belong. I was in the kitchen, hands shaking as I washed plates, when the family attorney walked in and gently touched my shoulder. You need to come to the reading room now. This concerns you. That's when I knew the time had come. The family was already seated, looking annoyed that the help had been brought in. The attorney cleared his throat, pulled out the will, and said, Since none of my children supported me in my time of leave, I leave everything to my beloved nurse and only true friend. There was a beat of silence, and then chaos as the family rose as one, their faces transforming from shock to pure rage, and Claire lunged toward me with her hands already reaching for my throat. Her fingers were almost at my neck when someone grabbed her from behind and yanked her backwards so hard she stumbled and fell against the conference table. Ernest McGrath, the funeral home's security guy who'd been standing by the door, had Claire's wrists pinned while she thrashed and screamed at me. Avery jumped up from his chair and rushed at me with his fist raised, but the attorney stepped right between us, holding the will up like he was blocking a vampire with a cross. Luke tried to come at me from the other side, but Ernest let go of Claire and shoved him back into his seat. The whole room exploded into shouting, and Claire kept trying to claw her way past Ernest to get to me while calling me every name she could think of. The funeral director ran in after hearing the noise, and his eyes went wide when he saw Claire still trying to attack me with Ernest barely holding her back. He pulled out his phone and started dialing while backing toward the door, telling Ernest to keep everyone separated until the police arrived. My legs gave out and I sank into a chair in the corner, my whole body shaking so bad I couldn't even hold my hands steady. The attorney moved his chair in front of mine like a barrier while Claire screamed that I was a thief and a murderer who'd stolen everything from them. Avery was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, pointing at me and yelling about lawsuits and deportation, while Luke kicked a chair so hard it crashed into the wall. Ernest had to physically block the doorway to keep them from coming at me again, his arms spread wide while they all screamed at once. 2 police officers showed up faster than I expected, probably because the funeral home was only 3 blocks from the station. They took one look at the chaos and immediately started separating everyone, putting the family in one room and me in another smaller office down the hall. I could still hear Claire shrieking through the walls that I'd manipulated her father and stolen their inheritance while I tried to tell the officer what happened. My voice kept breaking as I explained how they'd treated me during the funeral, and then Claire attacked me after the will reading. The officer, a woman who looked about my mom's age, took notes and kept asking me to slow down because I was talking too fast from panic. She asked if I had any injuries, and that's when I noticed the throbbing in my arms where Avery had grabbed me earlier during the funeral. When I rolled up my sleeves, there were already dark purple marks forming in the shape of fingers on both my upper arms. The officer took photos from every angle, measuring the bruises with a ruler while asking if anyone else had seen him grab me. She explained that Claire would probably be charged with attempted assault, and I needed to decide if I wanted to press charges against her. I nodded without even thinking about it because I was still terrified of what she might do to me if the police let her go. After the officers finished taking statements from everyone, the attorney sat down with me in the small office and pulled out a folder from his briefcase. He showed me documents proving the will was completely legal and binding, signed by Mr. Stewart and witnessed by 2 nurses at the hospice facility. He explained that Mr. Stewart had changed everything 6 months ago after his kids forgot his birthday for the 3rd year in a row. The will specifically stated that his children had abandoned him in his final years, and I was the only person who showed him real love and care. There were even notes Mr. Stewart had written about how I was more of a daughter to him than Claire had ever been. The attorney said the family could contest it, but they'd lose because Mr. Stewart had been evaluated by 3 different doctors, who all confirmed he was mentally sound when he made the changes. I finally left through the funeral home's backloading dock entrance while the family was still being questioned by police in the main building. My hands shook so bad I dropped my car keys twice before managing to unlock my beat-up Honda, and I had to sit there for 5 minutes before I felt steady enough to drive. The chest knife Mr. Stewart gave me was still in my pocket where I'd hidden it after Claire tried to take it, and I held it tight the whole drive back to my tiny studio apartment. That night, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, at least 30 in the first 2 hours. I listened to 3 voicemails before I couldn't take it anymore, all of them threats about calling immigration and having me deported even though I was born in Dallas. One message from Luke said he'd make sure I never worked in healthcare again, and another from Avery's wife called me an illegal gold digger who'd pay for what I'd done. I turned my phone off and sat on my couch crying while holding Mr. Stewart's chess piece, remembering how we'd play every afternoon while he told me stories about his life. The next morning, I turned my phone back on and immediately called Adeline Fowler, who'd been my supervisor at the hospice company for 3 years. She gasped when I told her what happened at the funeral and said she'd heard Claire had been arrested, but didn't know I was involved. Adeline was furious about how they'd treated me and immediately offered to write a statement about my professional conduct with Mr. Stewart and all the times he'd praised me to the staff. She said she had documentation of every time the family had been contacted about visits and declined, plus notes from Mr. Stewart asking why his children never came to see him. The attorney called an hour later to schedule a meeting about the estate, which apparently included the house, investments worth about $2 million, and all of Mr. Stewart's personal belongings. He warned me the family would definitely contest the will and try to drag things out in court for years if they could, hoping I'd give up or settle for less. He said we needed to move fast to secure the assets and make sure the family couldn't access any accounts or property before the court proceedings started. 3 days later, I walked into the police station to formally press assault charges against Claire, my stomach in knots even though I knew I was doing the right thing. The detective assigned to the case said they had multiple witnesses from the funeral home who saw Claire attack me, including Ernest and 2 other funeral home employees who'd heard the commotion. He showed me Claire's mugshot from when they'd booked her and said she'd been released on bail but had a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of me. 3 days after filing the police report, a process server knocked on my apartment door with a thick manila envelope that made my hands shake as I signed for it. Inside were 20 pages of legal documents with the Stewart family's law firm letterhead, claiming I'd used undue influence on Mr. Stewart, and that he wasn't mentally competent when he changed his will 6 months before he died. The papers said I'd isolated him from his loving family and manipulated a vulnerable elderly man for financial gain, which made me laugh and cry at the same time because they hadn't visited him in 18 months before he passed. I called the attorney immediately and he told me not to panic because this was expected. And we had a strong case since Mr. Stewart had been evaluated by 2 different doctors, who both confirmed he was completely mentally sound when he made the changes. The attorney connected me with his colleague who specialized in estate disputes, a woman named Isabella, who'd been doing this for 20 years and had seen families tear each other apart over money more times than she could count. Isabella reviewed all the documentation, including Mr. Stewart's medical records, the visitor logs from the hospice showing the family's absence, and statements from other nurses who'd witnessed our friendship develop over 2 years. She said our case was solid because Mr. Stewart had specifically requested the mental competency evaluations himself, knowing his children might contest the will, and both psychiatrists had given him perfect scores on all cognitive tests. The stress of everything started affecting my work at the hospice, where I'd been caring for 3 other patients, and I kept breaking down crying when I saw things that reminded me of Mr. Stewart, like crossword puzzles or chessboards. My supervisor Adeline noticed I wasn't myself, and gently suggested I take some time off until the legal situation was resolved, because my patients deserved someone who could give them full attention. I had to file for unpaid leave, which terrified me because my savings would only last about 2 months, and I couldn't afford to lose my apartment on top of everything else happening. That same week, I got a call from Cecilia Blackwell, who'd been Mr. Stewart's neighbor for 15 years, and had heard about what happened at the funeral from other neighbors who'd attended. She was furious about how the family treated me, and immediately offered to testify that Mr. Stewart constantly talked about me being the only person who visited him, and how his children never returned his calls or came for holidays. Cecilia told me she'd kept a journal where she documented every time she saw me arrive for my shifts, and how Mr. Stewart's face would light up when my car pulled into the driveway, plus all the times he'd cried to her about his children abandoning him. A week later, the Stewart family's lawyer sent a settlement offer through my attorney, a single page saying they'd give me $50,000 if I signed away all rights to the estate and agreed never to speak publicly about Mr. Stewart or his family. The insult of it made me so angry my hands were shaking because they were offering me less than what I'd earned in 2 years of caring for him, while they wanted to keep millions they'd done nothing to deserve. Isabella said this was a common tactic to test if I'd fold under pressure, and that refusing it would show we were serious about fighting for what Mr. Stewart wanted me to have. The harassment started on social media the next day, when Luke's teenage son and his friends found my Facebook and Instagram accounts and started posting comments calling me a gold digger, a thief, and worse names I won't repeat here. They created fake accounts to message my friends and family members saying I was a criminal who'd stolen from a dying man, and posted my photo on Reddit claiming I was an illegal immigrant who'd scammed an elderly veteran. I had to make all my accounts private and screenshot everything for the police, who said it was witness intimidation, but proving who was behind the fake accounts would be difficult without subpoenas. 2 weeks later was the preliminary hearing for Claire's assault charge at the courthouse downtown, and she showed up in a black designer suit playing the grieving daughter, who'd simply been overcome with emotion at her beloved father's funeral. Her lawyer argued she'd been in shock and grief when she lunged at me, but the prosecutor played the security footage from the funeral home that clearly showed her attacking me unprovoked while I was just standing there. The judge wasn't buying her act and set a trial date for 3 months later, maintaining the restraining order and warning Claire that any contact with me would result in immediate jail time. That afternoon, Isabella called me excited because my attorney had found something incredible while going through boxes of Mr. Stewart's belongings that the family had tried to claim before the estate was frozen. He'd discovered 5 notebooks filled with Mr. Stewart's handwriting from the past year, diary entries where he wrote extensively about how his children had abandoned him, and how I was the only person who treated him like family instead of a burden. The entries talked about our daily chess games, how I'd bring him his favorite Chinese food on my own dime, and how I'd stay late without pay just to keep him company when he couldn't sleep. One entry from 3 months before he died said I was the daughter he wished he'd had, and that leaving everything to me was the easiest decision he'd ever made because I'd earned it through love, not blood. I sat in my car crying for 20 minutes after Isabella read me that entry over the phone. 3 days later, I was at the grocery store buying ramen noodles because that's all I could afford when I saw Avery walking toward me down the cereal aisle with a look on his face that made my blood run cold. I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording while backing away, my finger hovering over the emergency call button as he got closer. He stopped about 10 feet away when he saw the phone and muttered something about me being a thief who'd pay for what I'd done before turning around and leaving the store. I called the police from my car and filed another report, adding it to the growing pile of documentation about the family's harassment and intimidation attempts. Isabella and my attorney spent the next week preparing our response to the will contest, gathering medical records from Mr. Stewart's doctors, the diary entries he'd written, and statements from 12 neighbors and hospice staff members who'd witnessed our relationship. The evidence literally filled 3 large boxes, including visitor logs showing the family hadn't visited in 18 months, phone records showing Mr. Stewart's unanswered calls to his children, and emails where he'd begged them to visit for his birthday and been ignored. We also had statements from other patients' families at the hospice who'd seen how Mr. Stewart and I interacted, including one woman who said she'd never seen a patient and caregiver develop such a genuine friendship. 2 weeks later, I walked into a cold conference room downtown for my deposition, my hands shaking as the family's lawyer set up a video camera and spread out stacks of papers across the table. He started by asking about my work history, then spent the next 6 hours picking apart every single interaction I'd had with Mr. Stewart over 2 years. He asked if I had a green card 5 different times, even though I'd already shown him my Texas birth certificate twice. He wanted to know exactly what medications I gave Mr. Stewart each day, implying I might have overdosed him, then asked about my immigration status again while I was answering. He made me describe every chess game we played, every crossword puzzle we solved, suggesting I was manipulating a confused old man the whole time. When I mentioned bringing Mr. Stewart Chinese food, he asked if I was trying to poison him with foreign food, then asked to see my work visa even though I'd already explained I was born in Houston. The court reporter looked uncomfortable as he asked about my parents' citizenship status, my grandparents' immigration papers, whether I sent money back to my home country. I kept repeating that Texas was my home country while he shuffled through papers and asked if I understood that lying about citizenship was a federal crime. By hour 4, he was asking the same questions over and over, trying to catch me in some kind of lie about how often I cleaned Mr. Stewart's room or whether I ever accepted tips from him. He actually asked if I could read English well enough to understand legal documents, speaking slowly like I was stupid, even though I'd been answering complex medical questions for hours. 3 days later, I got a call that Claire's assault trial was postponed because her lawyer claimed she needed mental health treatment for complicated grief. The prosecutor met with me that afternoon and explained this was a common tactic rich people use to avoid consequences, that Claire's therapist would claim she wasn't mentally competent to stand trial right now. She showed me the paperwork where Claire's lawyer argued that attacking me was a grief-induced breakdown, not criminal assault, even though the security footage clearly showed her lunging at my throat. The prosecutor warned me this could delay the trial for months while Claire attended therapy sessions she probably didn't need. My landlord knocked on my door the following week holding a letter the Stewart family had sent him, claiming I was under criminal investigation for elder abuse and theft. He said he didn't believe a word of it, but wanted me to know they were calling all the property management companies in town, trying to get me evicted or blacklisted. He'd already gotten 3 calls from other landlords asking if I was really a criminal, and he'd told them all it was harassment from a family mad about an inheritance. I started noticing the same gray sedan parked outside my apartment building every morning, then saw it again when I went grocery shopping, and at the pharmacy when I picked up my anxiety medication. My attorney filed for a restraining order when I sent her photos of the car following me to 4 different locations in one day. But even after the order was granted, I still saw different cars that seemed to appear everywhere I went. The windows were always tinted too dark to see who was driving, but I knew the family had hired someone to watch me. During discovery, my attorney called me excited because she'd found something huge in the family's own evidence they'd been forced to turn over. Their phone records showed they hadn't visited or even called Mr. Stewart in over 18 months before he died, and his phone logs showed dozens of unanswered calls where he'd tried to reach them. She had emails where Mr. Stewart begged Avery to visit for his birthday, and got no response. Voicemails where he asked Claire to come for Christmas that she never returned. The evidence showed Luke had actually blocked his father's number 6 months before he died. My savings account hit zero faster than I'd expected, and with the estate frozen during the legal fight, I had no choice but to sell my car to pay rent and buy food. The used car dealer gave me $3,000 for my Honda, enough to survive maybe 2 more months if I was careful. Taking the bus to work made me feel exposed and vulnerable, especially when I thought I recognized the man in the baseball cap who seemed to get on at my stop every morning. I started varying my routes, taking different buses, leaving at different times, but the anxiety was eating me alive. Cecilia's deposition happened on a rainy Thursday, and my attorney let me watch the video later because Cecilia had insisted on it. She testified for 3 hours about how Mr. Stewart would cry when his kids didn't show up for his birthday, how he'd wait by the window on Father's Day hoping they'd surprise him. She described watching his face light up whenever I arrived for my shift, how he'd tell anyone who'd listen about the crossword we'd finished, or the chess game I'd finally won. She said in 40 years of knowing him, she'd never seen him as happy as he was during our daily visits. The family's lawyer tried to twist everything during the next hearing, claiming I'd prevented the family from visiting by turning Mr. Stewart against them. My attorney immediately produced visitor logs from the hospice showing I'd actually encouraged Mr. Stewart to add his children to the approved visitor list, that I'd asked him multiple times if he wanted me to call them. The logs showed the family had unlimited access but simply never came, and the staff notes confirmed I'd suggested family visits regularly. Then Luke's wife, who I'd never even met before all this started, began showing up at the hospital where I used to work per diem shifts before Mr. Stewart got too sick. 3 of my former colleagues called to warn me she was in the administrator's office claiming I'd stolen drugs, that I'd abused patients, that I should never be allowed near vulnerable people again. The hospital couldn't legally fire me from per diem work without proof, but they stopped calling me for shifts, and I knew she'd successfully destroyed another source of income. Finally, the judge ordered mediation, which meant I'd have to sit in a room with the people who'd attacked me, harassed me, and tried to destroy my life because they didn't visit their dying father. My attorney promised she'd be right beside me the whole time, that she wouldn't let them hurt me again, but but I spent the night before throwing up from anxiety about facing them again. The mediation room was freezing and smelled like old coffee when I walked in with my attorney the next morning. Claire sat across the long table with her brothers, all three of them in expensive suits while I wore my only nice blouse from Target. The mediator, a tired-looking woman with gray hair, started explaining how this process worked, but Claire cut her off with a sob. She buried her face in her hands and started crying about how busy she'd been with her charity events and her kids' private school activities. For maybe 10 seconds, I actually felt bad for her, watching real tears run down her face as she talked about missing his birthdays. Then Avery grabbed her shoulder and whispered something about the money, and her tears stopped like someone turned off a faucet. The mediator shuffled her papers and suggested we could split everything down the middle, with me getting the house and half the money while the family took the other half. My attorney squeezed my knee under the table when I started to nod because honestly, I was so tired of fighting these people. Luke slammed his hand on the table and said they wouldn't give me a penny of their father's money. The mediator tried again with different numbers, but the family wouldn't budge from wanting everything. After 3 hours of going nowhere, we left with nothing resolved. That night, I sat on my apartment floor with the box of letters Mr. Stewart had written me during his last months. His handwriting got shakier in each one, but the message stayed clear. He wrote about how his kids only called when they needed money for their business ventures or their kids' college funds. He wrote about how I was the only one who asked about his day or remembered his favorite foods. The last letter, written 2 days before he died, said he wanted me to have everything because I'd already given him everything that mattered. I folded the letters carefully and called my attorney to tell her we weren't accepting any deals. 3 weeks later, Claire's criminal trial finally started in the downtown courthouse. The prosecutor played the security footage from the funeral home on a big screen for everyone to see. You could watch Claire's face change from shock to rage in slow motion before she launched herself at me with both hands out. The video showed everything clearly, her fingers reaching for my throat before the security guard pulled her back. Claire's lawyer tried to argue it was grief, and she never actually touched me, but the judge wasn't buying it. The jury took less than an hour to come back with a guilty verdict for misdemeanor assault. 2 days later at sentencing, Claire showed up in a conservative black dress trying to look sorry. The judge gave her 18 months probation and ordered her to take anger management classes. It wasn't jail time, but having assault on her record meant something to me. Claire had to stand there while the judge lectured her about attacking someone at a funeral. A week after that, I woke up to pounding on my apartment door at 6 in the morning. My neighbor was holding a man by the collar who'd been trying to jimmy my lock with a credit card. The man turned out to be the private investigator the Stewarts had hired to dig up dirt on me. The cops arrested him for attempted breaking and entering. At the police station, the detective showed me the investigator's phone with texts from Luke offering a bonus if he found anything illegal in my apartment. The investigator ended up telling the police everything about how the family wanted him to plant drugs if he couldn't find anything real. 2 of Mr. Stewart's old friends called me that same week after reading about the trial in the paper. They wanted to meet for coffee and tell me their stories about him. The first one, a man who'd known Mr. Stewart for 30 years, told me how Mr. Stewart talked about me at their weekly poker games. He said Mr. Stewart called me his real daughter and worried about what would happen to me after he died. The second friend, a woman from his church, said Mr. Stewart had shown her pictures of us playing chess and doing crosswords. She said she'd never seen him smile like that in photos with his actual kids. Both of them offered to testify if I needed them for the will contest. My attorney called the next day to tell me the trial date was set for next month. She said the family's case was falling apart with all the evidence we had, but they were too proud to give up. She warned me they'd probably try more tricks before the trial. I drove to the cemetery on a Sunday morning when I knew it would be empty. I hadn't been back since the funeral, and my hands shook as I walked to Mr. Stewart's grave. The headstone was simple gray granite with just his name and dates. I sat on the grass and told him everything that had happened, about the trial and the harassment, and how tired I was. I promised him I was trying to do what he wanted, and that I wouldn't let his kids bully me into giving up. I left the chestnut on his grave for a few minutes before putting it back in my pocket where it belonged. That afternoon, my attorney called with one more settlement offer from the family's lawyer. They would let me have the house if I gave up all the money and investments. My attorney actually laughed out loud on the phone and told me we were going to destroy them in court next month. The trial date came 4 weeks later, and I walked into the courthouse wearing the same black dress from the funeral. The family's lawyer stood up immediately and started painting me as some kind of monster who'd trapped a dying old man. He said I'd isolated Mr. Stewart from his loving family and manipulated him when he was too sick to think straight. He told the judge I'd probably given him extra pain meds to keep him confused while I worked my way into his will. Every word felt like a knife in my chest, but I kept my hands folded in my lap and didn't react. The lawyer showed bank records proving I'd deposited my paychecks every 2 weeks and said this proved I was getting paid plenty already. He brought up my background, saying I came from nothing and saw Mr. Stewart as my meal ticket out of poverty. When it was my turn to testify, my attorney asked me about my relationship with Mr. Stewart, and I started with the crosswords. I told the judge how we'd work on them together every morning, arguing about whether the answer was eras or ages for 4 across. I explained our pizza debates where he insisted pineapple belonged on pizza, and I'd pretend to be disgusted just to make him laugh. I described teaching him to use his tablet so he could video call his grandkids, though they never answered his calls. The judge leaned forward when I talked about the chess games where Mr. Stewart would tell me stories about his childhood while moving his pieces. I showed him the scorecard we kept where Mr. Stewart beat me 43 times to my 12 wins over 2 years. My voice cracked when I mentioned how he'd light up when I walked in each morning, calling me his sunshine girl. The family's lawyer tried to make it sound creepy, but the judge waved him off. Then came the family's turn to testify, and it fell apart fast. Avery couldn't name Mr. Stewart's favorite food when asked directly by my attorney. Claire didn't know what medications he took for his heart condition, even though there were 7 different pills. Luke actually got his father's middle name wrong, calling him James instead of John. When asked about Mr. Stewart's hobbies, they all said golf, even though arthritis had stopped him from playing 15 years ago. My attorney asked them to name any of his friends, and they sat there silent. She asked about his favorite TV shows, his morning routine, even what brand of coffee he drank. They knew nothing. The judge asked Claire when she'd last had a conversation with her father before he got sick. She claimed it was just a few months ago, but my attorney produced phone records showing no calls for 18 months. The judge's face got harder with each lie they told. A week later, we gathered for the verdict, and the judge didn't hold back. He said the will was completely valid, and Mr. Stewart had every right to leave his estate to someone who actually cared about him. He noted that I'd provided daily companionship, while the family couldn't even remember basic facts about their father. He specifically said Mr. Stewart's medical records showed he was mentally sharp until the very end. The family's lawyer jumped up immediately to file an appeal, and the judge rolled his eyes but said they had 30 days. My attorney warned me later this could drag on for another year, but said they had 0 chance of winning. She explained they were just being spiteful now and wasting everyone's time and money. 3 weeks into the appeal period, I was finally allowed to enter Mr. Stewart's house as the legal owner. The key turned easily in the lock, and I stepped into the hallway where we'd celebrated his last good day. His reading chair still had the indent from where he'd sat every afternoon with his mystery novels. The chessboard was still set up from our last game, waiting for him to make his next move. I found our crossword book on the side table with his pencil still marking the page. That's when I finally cried. Really cried. For the first time since the funeral. I sat in his chair and smelled his cologne still faint in the fabric. The kitchen had his favorite mug next to the coffee maker, and his pills still lined up in the weekly organizer I'd filled. 8 months passed with legal documents flying back and forth before the appeals court finally reviewed the case. They dismissed it in less than an hour, saying there was absolutely no legal basis for overturning the original decision. The family had spent thousands on lawyers for nothing, and the house was officially mine forever. I moved in the next week, bringing my few boxes of belongings into the massive house. The first thing I did was set up Mr. Stewart's chess set in the living room exactly where we used to play. The knight he'd given me went on the mantle where I could see it every morning when I came downstairs. I kept everything else mostly the same because it felt like he was still there somehow. Adeline called me a month later saying she'd heard about everything and asked if I wanted my hospice job back. She said the whole team had been rooting for me and they'd love to have me return. I started back the next Monday, more determined than ever to make sure my patients felt loved and remembered. My experience with Mr. Stewart made me pay even more attention to the lonely ones whose families never visited. 2 weeks after I moved in, a letter arrived from Claire's lawyer with her handwriting on the envelope inside. She apologized for attacking me at the funeral and asked if we could meet to talk about her father. I read it twice, then dropped it straight into the trash can. Some people don't deserve second chances, especially when they only want them after losing millions. The house felt too big sometimes, but I turned Mr. Stewart's office into a space for the hospice volunteers to meet. We started a program matching lonely patients with visitors who actually wanted to spend time with them. Mr. Stewart would have loved knowing his house was helping other forgotten people feel less alone. I started working with a lawyer to set up the Stewart Foundation for Forgotten Patients using part of the inheritance money. The paperwork took weeks, but I wanted it done right, creating a fund that would pay for companionship services and cover funeral costs for hospice patients whose families never visited. The lawyer helped me structure it so the money would last for years, helping dozens of people avoid dying alone like Mr. Stewart almost had. I put in $200,000 to start, knowing Mr. Stewart would have loved that his money was helping other abandoned people. The foundation would pay for volunteers to visit, play games with patients, and make sure they had someone at their funeral who actually cared. 6 months after winning the case, I was depositing a check at the bank when I saw Luke at the next teller window. He glanced over and our eyes met for just a second before he looked away and walked quickly toward the exit. His shoulders hunched forward and he kept his head down, nothing like the man who'd shaken me and threatened deportation at the funeral. The teller asked if I was okay, and I realized I was smiling because Luke couldn't even look at me anymore. Cecilia started coming over every Sunday afternoon for tea in Mr. Stewart's kitchen. We'd sit at his old table and she'd tell me stories about him from 20 years ago, when his wife was still alive. She showed me photos of him younger and healthier, teaching his kids to ride bikes before they grew up and forgot about him. She always said he'd be so proud that I stood up to those awful children and didn't let them bully me into giving up what he wanted me to have. Those Sunday teas became my favorite part of the week, sharing memories with someone else who really knew and loved him. I went back to my hospice job full-time even though I didn't need the money anymore. My patients could tell the difference, that I was there because I wanted to be with them, not because I had to pay rent. I spent extra time with the ones whose families never came, playing cards or reading to them or just sitting quietly holding their hands. Adeline said I was different now, more confident and sure of myself, and the patients responded to that strength. The local newspaper heard about the Stewart Foundation and sent a reporter to interview me. The story ran on the front page with a photo of me in Mr. Stewart's living room, holding the chess knight he'd given me. Within days, donations started arriving from all over town, people who'd watched their own loved ones be abandoned or who'd been forgotten themselves. An anonymous donor sent $50,000 with a note saying they wished someone had done this for their mother. The foundation account grew to $500,000 within 3 months, enough to help patients for decades. A year after the court case, I was playing chess with a new patient named Harold, who had the same sharp mind Mr. Stewart had. He mentioned his kids lived across the country and never called, too busy with their own lives to care about his. I moved my bishop and told him family isn't always about blood, that he got to choose who his real family was. He smiled and moved his knight, saying I sounded like I knew from experience. We played every Tuesday and Thursday after that, and I made sure he knew he wasn't alone. I finally had enough money and time to go back to the school for my RN degree. The night classes were hard after full days at the hospice, but I pushed through because Mr. Stewart always said I was too smart to stay at the same level forever. The other students were mostly younger, but they accepted me, and we formed study groups that met at my house because I had the most room. Walking across that graduation stage 18 months later, I wished Mr. Stewart could see me in my cap and gown. Every night before bed, I'd go to the living room and look at the chess knight on the mantel. I'd touch it gently and thank Mr. Stewart for seeing me as family when his own kids couldn't be bothered to visit. His love and trust changed everything for me, from barely making rent to owning a beautiful home, from being treated like worthless help to running a foundation that helped hundreds of forgotten patients. The night reminded me that real family is about who shows up, who stays, who cares enough to be there at the end. Mr. Stewart chose me, and I chose him, and that choice made all the difference in both our lives. Thanks for sticking around and exploring all these questions with me. It's always interesting to wonder about this stuff together. Take care, and if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.